Hi there, this is Sandra from the Schwowin's Nest. I'd like to welcome you to my 12 Days of Christmas DIYs and Decor series. I'm starting December off with my top 20 Farmhouse Christmas DIYs. Being a crafter, I save everything. This is a lid from a canister that I redid last year. I'm going to use some crud cutter and just clean it up really good before I start painting it. It's already got this little lip on the inside, so I thought that would be a perfect little frame. I'm going to give the inside square a couple of coats of DIY chalk paint. I have this stencil of a Christmas tree, and I thought I'm going to do something a little different. I didn't want this Christmas tree to be a solid black, so I'm just going to tape it down, and what I'm going to do is dry brush it. The technique I use is to dip my brush into a little bit of paint and then dab off as much excess as I need, usually quite a bit. I usually start on the lighter side and then I add more paint as I need. What I'm doing is just going back and forth, making sure that I hold the edges of the stencil down nice and tight so my brush doesn't go underneath and bleed through. This is turning out amazing. I love the texture of it. I love how it looks. It's getting some of the lines from the white paint underneath, and it turns out amazing. For a finishing touch, I'm just taking my dry brush and going all the way around the edges, a little bit extra in the corners to make it look more distressed and worn. The second little mini sign that I'm going to make is just using this little piece of scrap wood. I'm just going to give the top of it a couple of coats of the white paint. I have this reindeer printout that I used on a different project. It's still got the pencil marks on the back, which is how I transferred it before, and I'm going to do the same thing now. So I'll just use my pen and trace it out really nice and firm so I get that pencil mark on the white paint. Using my black oil-based Craft Smart paint pen, I'm going to fill in the reindeer, but I'm going to skip his antlers. When I'm coloring, I always like to do an outline first and then fill in after. I thought I would add a little bit of Christmas cheer for this reindeer, so I'm using some of this Deco Art Chalky Finish paint in the color Romance, and I'm also going to mix a little bit of black in there just to get a nice deeper red color. Using a fine tip artist paintbrush, I'm going to just fill in the antlers. To make the reindeer look a little bit more distressed, I'm just going to take a tiny little dry brush and do some stippling, so some pouncing up and down, just to give it a little bit more of a worn look. This third project is using this printout of buffalo check paper, and I will put the link to where I purchased this. This was an Etsy digital download, and I've also got this black arrow, and I'm not sure if I got this at the Dollar Tree or at Dollarama, but what I'm going to do is cover the arrow part with the buffalo check paper. I like using my scrapbook cutter for long cuts like this, but you can also just use scissors. Here I'm just going to use a pencil to trace out the arrow portion. I'm going to use Mod Podge to attach the paper to the arrow, but what I'm going to do is use some water in a spray bottle and mist the back of the paper. That's going to give me a lot more working time. If I put the paper on dry, it's going to stick and I won't be able to move or adjust it. This method also prevents more air bubbles from getting in because the paper and the glue are both wet and you can smooth them out really nicely together. Using some little bits of scrap wood that I have, and these are little garden stakes, but you can also use jumbo popsicle sticks for this. I've cut them down into all of the pieces to fit all the way around the arrow. So I'm going to just start with my hot glue and start putting everything together. Once I have everything assembled, I'm going to give the exterior and interior of the house part a coat of black paint, but the roof is going to get some gray paint. You'll notice at the bottom here that I have these little wood cubes glued to the back of the house, and that's just to give it a little bit of extra stability so it doesn't tip over. I'm using Country Gray from Rust-Oleum for the roof. Using my dry brush technique, I am just going to do a little bit of distressing on the roof just to make it look a little bit more weathered. I wanted this little house to look like the exterior of a home, so I'm taking a couple of pieces of greenery from a wreath and I'm just going to twist them together and make a little wreath out of them. And to make it look a little bit more high end, I'm going to actually do some trimming of the branches so they don't look quite so fluffy. So in true Sandra fashion, I have some footage that is missing. And as I was doing this, I was watching a video and didn't notice the ding when my memory card said, I'm full and I can't record anymore. So I missed out being able to show you how I created the little wreath and the little Christmas trees that you can see there. But I will explain those in a bit. Here I'm using some regular size popsicle sticks and I'm trimming them to make a little window. And these miter shears are the best invention ever. They're also the best tool for me because I have really bad arthritis in my wrists, and this makes it super easy to be able to cut things down. So I will have this listed down in my description box if you're interested in purchasing one of these. The window is just going to be a little simple rustic window with 4 panes on it, and I'm just using hot glue to put it all together. Here's the finished little window, really simple to make. I'm going to cover it with some Rust-Oleum Country Gray chalk paint, and then I'm going to attach it to my little house. I also decided to give it just a little bit of dry brushing with some black to make it old and rustic. Here's where I can explain to you what I did with the decor for this little house. Here's the little wreath. I just trimmed it down and I added a couple of little pine cones and some little red pip berries. The trees at the bottom came from the Dollar Tree, and I just trimmed off the white snow mound at the bottom. I really don't like that. I also trimmed one of the trees a little bit shorter. I added some pip berries just with some hot glue and a couple of jingle bells for the top of the trees and some pine cones at the bottom. With the window glued on, it didn't look right to have that buffalo check paper sticking out from underneath, so I just filled in the window with some white paint. My next project is using this Market Fresh Eggs sign, which doesn't do well in my area. For some reason, there aren't a lot of farmhouse people here. So what I'm doing is just taking some sandpaper and sanding down the letters and the chicken just to get rid of that raised finish. Then, just to cover up any imperfections, I gave it a coat of black chalk paint, and now I'm going over it with a couple coats of white chalk paint. I'm leaving the frame around the edge the way it is because it's really nicely distressed, and it's one step that I don't have to do again. I really loved the way I dry brushed that first tree in the first project of this video, so I decided to do the same thing for this one. But what I'm doing is I'm going to make this tree just a little bit bigger. So I've taped off the little stump down at the bottom, and I'm going to center it at the very top and start dry brushing this part of the tree. What I've done now is just moved the stencil down and to the left a little bit to make the bottom part of a larger tree, and I'll repeat the process on the right hand side. This is going to give me a much larger tree. Since some of the areas at the bottom got a little darker, I'm just taking a smaller brush and just adding in some darker segments to the top too. Then I'm just adding a little hand-painted tree trunk. There's a bunch of white space on this sign, so I am going to be putting some letters in, and this is a brand new stencil that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I actually grabbed 4 or 5 different designs, and I really like these because they're nice and thick. I will be cutting them into strips just so they're easier to work with, and then I'm going to stencil in some letters. These letter stencils are just fitting in between those two ridges, so I didn't want to take the chance of making a mess with my makeup sponge and the paint and stenciling them. Instead, I'm using my pencil and I'll trace them out and then fill them in with a marker. So I'm putting Farm Fresh Christmas trees, and this is the marker that I love to use. It's a scrapbook marker. I've had it for ages. It still works really well. The one thing I have to remember about this though is that it smudges. So I'm going to be very, very careful to not smudge any of this lettering because I don't want it to look that distressed. I wanted that frame of the Christmas tree to pop, so I'm just using a little bit of black and I'm just going very gently around the edge to distress it and make the frame stand out more. I wanted to dress this up a little bit with some greenery, so I've got these little stems that I picked up from Amazon. I'll have a link to that down in the description box. I actually found these from DIY Beauty on Purpose, Leah Knepp, and they are just beautiful and they come in a huge pack. I think you get like 100 pieces for $14. So I'm going to just take some hot glue and glue those to the very top of the sign. I'm also adding a little bit of holly, and I'm using my Dollar Tree makeup applicator, which is a silicone little paddle, to hold down the hot glue so I don't burn my fingers. Those little fingertip protectors are a little too small for my fat, chubby fingers, so this works out really well for me. This is a tip that I picked up from Holly over at Hot Humble Pie. I'm also going to just add a few of these berries. This last sign is also something that I'm redoing. This one had a little greenery wreath on it, but I decided to remove that wreath and write in the word Merry. Now, I tend to start from the end of the word and work my way backwards, and I'm just freehanding this with my Craft Smart paint pen. And I'm just going to go ahead and add all of the letters in, and then I'll embellish them a little bit. Now that I have the letters down, I'm going to just go over them with my paint pen, but on every stroke that goes down, I'm going to make that thicker. And then the upstrokes will be still thinner, but the downstrokes will be thicker. So that's how I get my letters to look more high end. The other thing that I like to do on some of my letters is to make a little shadow mark. So I'm just using my favorite scrapbook marker, and I'm going to go on the left side of each of the lines, not all of the lines, but some of them. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a bit of a shadow so it looks more like it was stenciled on. I have some cute little holly leaves that I'm using that I picked up from Dollarama, but they had those little red plastic berries. I didn't like that, so I'm going to just pull those off, trim off the ends a little bit, and then I'll probably be adding some of the other red pip berries that I like so much. I'm going to be starting in the corner here and put some greenery going down and then some going across. I like sometimes to make things a little off center so it's not just looking so normal. I'm also going to add some of the pip berries in and hot glue everything into place. I've got the pip berries glued in, and I'm just going to add a couple of little pine cones up in the corner. To make this look a little bit more high end, I'm just going to add some holly and a pine cone into the bottom right corner, and then I'm just going to distress the edges a little bit of the frame. I'm also going to dry brush a little bit on the inside of it where the shiplap lines are, and just to give it a worn and rustic look. Project number 1 today is some string trees. So I've got some twine on a spool and some aluminum foil and some plastic wrap. Using about a 12-inch piece of foil, I'm going to roll it into a cone shape and then cut off the excess and make the bottom as flat as possible. The cone should stand on its own. Using a long piece of plastic wrap, I'm going to totally cover up the foil. The plastic wrap is going to prevent the glue from sticking to the foil. You could also make a cone out of styrofoam or some cardboard. I just wanted to make sure that whatever I was going to be putting the string around was flexible enough that I'd be able to squish it and pull it out. Starting with a piece of twine, I'm going to just make a knot at the bottom of the tree, and that's going to just help secure it in place so it doesn't loosen up. Now all you have to do is just wrap the twine around the cone shape. You can go in any direction or pattern that you like. It doesn't have to be perfect. I actually like mine kind of messy and not perfect at all. So I'm just going to keep wrapping at the bottom, and then I'm going to turn it around and wrap at the top as well. Once you have enough twine, you can go ahead and tie it off. I'm going to be taking some Mod Podge, and I have it in a small bowl. I've diluted it about a third water to 2/3 Mod Podge. I want this to be the consistency of school glue. Now you can use regular school glue or any other white glue you have. You just need to make sure that it is easily spreadable. You want the twine to be able to absorb all of that glue. So you're going to put it on fairly heavy and make sure that you get every little bit of twine covered in the glue. I wanted this tree to have a little bit more texture and color, so I'm just taking some cotton butcher twine and I'm doing the same thing, wrapping it around, but I'm just not going to be putting as much on it. I still want some of the brown twine to show through. Once I have the look I like, I'm just taking the glue and I'll apply it to the cotton twine. Then I decided to add one more thin layer of the regular twine. I let the trees dry overnight to make sure that the glue was good and hard. Then I took the plastic wrap and the foil and I squished it from the inside at the bottom and very gently pulled it out. I wanted to add a little bit of a snow or icy effect, so I'm taking a can of hairspray and just spraying a strip of the tree and then putting some Epsom salts on top. I'm going to tap it down with the spoon and with my finger, shake off the excess, and then I'll give it another coat of hairspray, which will help the Epsom salts to continue to stick to the tree. I really love how these trees turned out, and I do have some of that white and black butcher twine. I just might give that a try and make a string tree from that too. The second DIY I have for you today is using some corks. So you'll see that these corks look a little wet, and it's a good idea to take them and put them in hot water for about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, just so they soften up a little bit. Then they're a little easier to cut, and they also won't crumble as easily. Altogether, you'll need 3 corks for this project. I've cut one in half, so 2 of the larger corks will be the body and the 2 smaller ones will be the head. Now I'm cutting some pieces of bamboo skewer, which will become the reindeer's legs. And if you haven't already figured it out, this is the reindeer DIY. Working with corks can be a little tough. They were giving me a hard time, but I did use the pointed end of the skewer and then just kind of twisted and pushed at the same time, and I was able to get them all in. I also ended up making a little pre-drilled hole with a sharp bamboo skewer, and then later on I ended up using a tiny little screwdriver, which made a much bigger hole and it was easier to put in. These skewers will become the legs of the reindeer, and I'm putting them on an angle so I can make sure that the reindeer will stand up properly. To attach his little cork head, I cut a smaller piece of skewer, made a hole at the top of the reindeer's body, pushed the skewer in, and then pushed the cork head onto that skewer. If you're out and about on social media, look me up. I'm on Pinterest and Instagram. So here's my little reindeer. He's standing up on his own fairly well. I'm going to embellish him now, and I'm using these little red pip berries for his antlers. So I've cut off a piece of 2 little pip berries, and I'm just folding up the bottom, which will be the little antler that is closer to their head. I'm still going to have to make a pretty big hole and push that in. It took a little bit of effort, but it was worth it in the long run because these guys turned out so cute. Last spring at our cottage, I actually went foraging, and we have some hemlock trees that give us these tiny, tiny little pine cones. I thought these would be perfect for the deer's tail and for his ears. Since their little antlers are red, I decided to give them a black nose just using this tack. My reindeer was looking pretty cute at this point, but I wanted to give him a little bit extra stability. So I've got these tiny little wood beads that are from the dollar store, and I'm just going to put some hot glue and then push the skewer into the bead, and that will become his little foot. I wanted the reindeer to feel a little cozy, so I decided to give him a little buffalo check ribbon for a scarf. I'd like to give a big thanks to Chelsea and Andrew, who gave me a huge bag of corks and were the inspiration for this little craft. Chelsea and Andrew are part of my extended family, and they have started the Happy Dog Homestead blog. Their dream is to be homesteaders, and they are doing a really fantastic job so far. They have some chickens, they've got a huge garden, they've got their pups Jasper and Duke, and they love to go canoe camping and do all things outdoors. They are also fantastic writers and photographers, so please go check out their blog. The link will be down in my description box. And here's how my little reindeer turned out. So I've got the reindeer, but now I need their feed. I'm taking this fine weave burlap and I'm going to cut about a 6-inch piece off. I'm going to fold it in half and then hot glue the ends together. I've been using those little pink silicone fingertips from the Dollar Tree, but you know what? They just don't fit. They're too small for my fingers. So I decided to just grab one of their little spatulas, and I'm using the handle end to place it onto the hot glue and prevent burns on my finger. It's working out really well. Now I'm just gluing the bottom ends together, and I made sure that the original seam was also at the back. Burlap is really hard to write on, so I decided to grab this little piece of drop cloth and I just cut it into a rectangle shape, and I'm going to take a fine tip black marker and write in Reindeer Feed. Then I'll simply hot glue the little label right on top of the burlap sack. To fill up the bag, I'm just using a little mix of green and yellow peas. This is just something that I had for a fall craft, so I thought I would just use it up. And then I'm just going to hot glue the bag together. I'm also just going to take a little bit more of that buffalo check ribbon and glue it onto the top, crossing it over in the front, and then adding a little bit of holly and some leaves. The final project I have for you is super simple. I have this little white container that I had from a thrift store. I've taken an egg carton just to give it a little bit of filler, and now I'm just going to take a little screwdriver and poke a couple of holes so I can attach these bottle brush trees. I'm going to just use a little bit of hot glue to hold them in place. I'm now going to add another smaller tree right next to the big one, but a little bit in front. While I was putting it in, I just wiggled the branches just a little bit so it would kind of wedge itself into the original tree. But I did end up having to add a little bit of hot glue to hold them together. Taking some of the Epsom salts, I'm just going to fill up the whole little container, and that'll just give the trees and that little egg carton a little bit more stability. It'll also look very much like icy snow. I really liked how this was looking, but I thought I would like to maybe add some of these little tiny trees as well. I'm just taking the bottoms off simply by sort of unscrewing it a little bit, and I'm not going to glue these little trees in place. They just sit there really nicely. I'm just going to poke them in wherever I feel like. I finally found this black and white cotton twine. I did have to get it at Michael's because our dollar stores up here just don't seem to have any. I'm going to take a length of it and wrap it around a few times on the base of the little container and then just tie a knot. And here's how he turned out. I think it's just adorable. This box is something that I had thrifted a while ago. It's already gotten a coat of paint for a different project, so I'm going to repurpose it for this one. I just need to remove the latch. I'm going to sand down the wood where the latch was just to make an even surface. This paint that I'm using is just an eggshell paint that can be used anywhere in your home. It was a mist tint that I picked up at the hardware store, and it's kind of a taupey gray color. It's fairly dark, but I thought it would be a really nice base coat for a wood texture. So I'm going to give this whole box one coat. I needed to add something inside the box to make it higher. So this is just a cardboard box that I had laying around. I cut it to size, and now I'm going to hot glue it to the bottom of the box. Instead of painting this, I'm going to just fold up a piece of paper a couple of times over and then cut it to fit and glue that right on top of the cardboard. I also put a bead of hot glue between the paper and the box just to hold it in place better. Now I'm going to work with these little pieces of scrap wood, and I'm just going to glue the triangle pieces onto the rectangle pieces and make little wood houses. With a dry brush and some burnt umber acrylic paint, I'm going to go around the edges like this and make it look like wood grain. Once the brown is dry, I'm going to start doing the same thing with black. A dry brush, actually I'm using the same brush, and I'm just going to make it look more distressed and old and weathered. I'm making a little bottle brush village, and what I've done here is just put all of the bottle brush trees in there to plan how I want it to look. Then I decided that I wanted to raise the houses, make them just a little bit taller, so I'm using a tumbling tower block and I'm going to glue that onto the bottom of each of the houses. Then I'm just going to use hot glue to glue the house in place. I'll repeat the same thing for the second one. Then I'm just going to start hot gluing the trees onto the paper. I've left the plan in place, and I'm just going to pick up each tree individually, add some hot glue to the bottom, and stick it down. I've got a whole big box of bottle brush trees from last year and from this year, but I came across these little birch branches that were really sweet. I think I picked these up at my Dollarama last year for $1.25 I think for two. And I'm just going to be pulling apart the branches to make it look more like a natural tree. I decided to add a couple at the back and one in the front. Then I started putting the little bottle brush trees in, and this kind of changed a little bit. I just wanted them in the front a little bit, but I also used them around the sides and the back for some fillers. For a final touch, I'm going to use some Epsom salts and put them in where there's all the white space to cover up the paper and to give it a little bit more of a Christmas snowy look. There really isn't an easy way to glue down these Epsom salts. I didn't want them to lose their sparkle, so I will probably take the salt out once I go to store it after the holidays. Here's how my little box Christmas village looks. My next project for you is using all dollar store products. I have three Dollar Tree Christmas trees, and this is a wood look pot that I picked up at Dollarama in the summertime and never used it. So I thought it would be the perfect addition for this tree. So I am sure everyone is familiar with these little Dollar Tree trees. They are worth $1 because they're very sparse, but if you do a little magic with them, you can make them look better. So what I'm doing is opening up the tree, and I'm going to just open it up one side. So I'm going to leave the back side flat, and I'm just going to open up all of the branches, and I'll do that for two of them. What I'm going to do now is put them together back to back so the both flat sides will meet in the center. And I'm just going to use some small black zip ties or cable ties to hold them together. I'm going to add one at the bottom and one towards the top. I've taken out the third tree and I've fluffed it all the way around. Now I'm going to zip tie that onto the first bunch of trees about a third of the way down. These zip ties are on the shorter side, so I just put two of them together and that will do the trick. Then I'm going to end up with a 2.5 foot tree. This is what the tree looks like. Now it is out of shape because I've got the bottom fluffed and then it goes narrow. And then I've got bigger branches from the bottom of the third tree and then going narrow again. Well, I'm going to give you a trick to fix that. So what I'm doing here is fluffing it out as best I can. And please excuse the craft space behind the tree. This is what some of my craft room looks like. And if you're a fellow crafter, you probably have the same kind of thing happening in your home. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a crafter. I've got a piece of floral foam glued to the bottom of the container, and now I'm just going to push the tree right down into it. So here's another Dollar Tree product that I'm sure everyone is familiar with. It's those wired garland ties. I've got a pack here. I think there are 12 or 15 in a pack. What I'm going to do is just kind of run my fingers around it to fluff up the branches a little bit better. And then I'm going to cut it into three different pieces. Real Christmas trees don't have single branches coming out from the trunk of the tree. So what I'm going to do to the majority of these branches is take the pieces that I've cut, wrap them around the individual branches about halfway down, and then it will become a branch with three stems on it instead of one stem. This is going to make the tree look so much more high end and realistic. So I'm going to continue to do that and fill out the tree. That third tree on the top needs a haircut. So you can see that I've already trimmed one side of it, and I'm going to go ahead and trim the other side because I want this to be a taller, narrower tree. I don't need all of these branches sticking out so far from the original trunk. You can see it's already starting to look better. What I'm going to do with those little bits that I cut off is use some hot glue and glue them in towards the stem to give the trunk and the center of the tree a little bit more fullness. Okay, now check this out. This is three Dollar Tree trees. And look at how beautiful it's turned out. Oh, plus a package of the garland ties. It looks beautiful. So what I'm going to do now is just decorate it with some fillers and a little bit of white berries and some pine cones. I want this tree to be more natural and rustic. I'm not gluing any of these pieces into the tree because I'm probably going to do a little bit of a different theme with it next year. So I want to be able to just pull everything off at the end of the season. I'm also now going to take it outside and give it a spray of snow. The last project that I have today is using this rustic wood frame that I built out of some scrap pallet wood and some thin MDF. And I put the frames together all at once a couple of weeks ago when the weather was still really nice and I was able to get outside and use my table saw. I'm going to paint the interior of the sign, so the panel, with a couple of coats of Rust-Oleum linen white chalk paint. I'm using a bit of black in with this beautiful green color to make a really deep, dark green. I want my Christmas tree sign to not be the traditional farmhouse black and white sign. I'm thinking that a little bit of green might look really nice. Instead of stenciling in the design, I'm going to use my dry brush and I'm going to do a dry brush technique with all of these trees. This is something that I kind of stumbled upon a while back, and I really love the effect of this. I think a solid tree looks nice too, but I'm just loving this type of texture that I'm getting from the dry brushing. As I was filming this reveal, I realized that I haven't done a big reveal like this in a really long time. So, ta-da! There are my three beautiful Christmas trees. The touch of green, I think, is just perfect. There were a couple of areas that got a little bit of a thicker color, so I decided just to go in with my little paintbrush here and just add a little bit more dimension to the trees. The other thing that I decided to do was take a little bit of black on a small dry brush and just add a little bit more dimension to the trunk at the bottom of each of the trees. A few weeks ago, I was at the Dollar Tree and they had these beautiful lettering stencils, these alphabet stencils. They are super high quality. The stencil itself is really nice and thick. I like to cut my stencils apart into the strips because they're easier to manage. You can leave them whole if you want, but when I'm working with smaller dimensions and I need to get inside, I would rather have them separate. So I'm going to be just stenciling on with a makeup sponge and some black paint. And of course, keeping with farmhouse tradition, I'm going to use the words farm fresh at the top, and then I'm going to put something a little bit different down at the bottom. I've also got a makeup sponge tip for you. The ones I'm using here are very soft. They're not the ones I had previously. This is a new bag that I bought and they're really, really soft. You really have to use a lot of pressure to get the color to go on. So I'm going to be tossing these and I'm going to be looking for some firmer ones. So just make sure that they are a really nice firm sponge and not anything too squishy. Down at the bottom, I'm using my pencil to write out the words pine, spruce, and fir. Now I'm just going to trace over the letters using my favorite scrapbooking marker, which is really old. I've had it for a very long time, but it has stood the test of time. It still has tons of ink in it. And I like to use this instead of my Craft Smart oil-based markers when I'm doing more of a fine line font. Using my ruler, I'm just going to mark some long lines in between the words. I'm using the fine tip end of the same marker, and I like to draw shadow lines on my fonts. This makes them look more finished and more professional. The last thing I'm going to do for this sign is add some grain sack striping to both ends. There's a little bit too much white space, so I needed to add something in. I'm starting about a half an inch in, and I'm just going to do one of the thick marker lines all the way down. Then I'm going to move in about another quarter of an inch and do another set of lines, which will be the thicker stripe. And then I'll do another thin stripe on the opposite side. One thing that I like to do when I'm using markers and a ruler is every time I pick it up, I wipe off the ink. There's always a little bit of ink left over, and when I'm working on a white space, I don't want any of that ink to transfer and make a mess. Finally, I wanted to add some greenery. I have these picks that I got in a bag from Amazon, and they will be linked down in my description box. And I've also got a few of the Dollar Tree pine cones. I'm just going to use some hot glue and attach those to the top of the frame. I just love how this sign turned out, and I've got it hanging in my living room. My first little DIY is using this pot that already has been painted and has some moss in it. And I'm taking these tiny little evergreen picks that I got from Amazon. I'll have the product linked in my description box, and they're so pretty. They come in a huge bag, and all I'm going to do is arrange them in such a way that they look a little bit like a Christmas tree. Super easy to do. Next, I'm going to take some of this white and black twine, wrap it around a couple times, and tie it in a cute little bow. The second project I have for you today is using these letters that are going to spell out Holly Jolly. I started by doing a bit of a stain on them with black and brown acrylic paint. Didn't like that effect, so I took my white Craft Smart paint pen, painted them white. Still didn't like it, so I ended up painting them red. And I'm glad I went with the red. It showed up nice and deep because of the stain underneath it. Now I'm going to take one of these tote bags from the Dollar Tree. This buffalo check pattern is awesome to use in crafts, and it's so much easier than having to paint the buffalo check. It's a little on the shiny side, but if you put some Mod Podge on top and you're using the matte Mod Podge, it will dull the shine a little bit. I've cut a square of the buffalo check bag out, and my idea is to put it on top of this previously stained little palette. Now, what I want to be able to do is cut it out and make sure that I've got a little bit of that wood frame showing all the way around. What I want to do is have those little slats be visible. So I'm taking my craft knife and I'm just running it along the edge of the bottom slat and therefore cutting the bag, and then I'll be able to glue that on. Now you may be wondering why I'm not just gluing the piece of bag on top of the palette and then cutting out the slats. Well, I don't want to lose my pattern, and if I do that, then I'm going to have a smaller pattern. Some squares will be small, some squares will be big, and I don't want to do that. Now, the other thing I did was I just marked where I needed to cut, and I used my scissors because it just ended up being a cleaner cut and much easier. And voila, it's all finished. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I lost a whole bunch of footage, so I'm just going to talk you through what I did for this little DIY. Once I had the buffalo check bag all glued on, I took my letters, and you can see here that I used some large letters and some smaller letters, and I wanted this to be just a fun little sign. So I put the holly and the jolly a little wonky, and then I just literally added some holly and some red berries in the center, and this sign is finished. As I said earlier with that little pot, I like to reuse things, and I invested in two of these little espresso cups. They look like enamel. They're not, of course, but they were just $1.25 at my Dollarama store. And the reason I love these, and with my Craft Smart paint pen, is I can draw all sorts of things onto this, and then using pure acetone, I can literally just wipe it off and start something for the next season. So originally these had pumpkin spice on them, and now I'm going to do a Christmas tree. So this Christmas tree is looking pretty lame right now, but just bear with me, it gets better. Now, I don't want you to be intimidated by this. If you can't freehand draw yourself, that's okay. There's lots of other options. You could use some window clings, you could use a decal, a sticker, anything that you wanted to just dress up these little mugs. For the second little mug, I'm going to draw a little reindeer head, and it turns out pretty good. If you have a vinyl or a sticker or a decal, anything like that, it would probably turn out a little bit nicer, but I don't know how easy it is to peel all of those off, so I like doing things freehand so I can change it up for the season. My next little project is using this little Dollar Tree sleigh. It's an ornament, but I'm going to remove the string, and I'm also going to remove that little embellishment because I have some different ideas for this. I love all things enamel, so I'm going to give it a couple of coats of the linen white chalk paint. I'm going to do the exterior, I'm going to do the interior, and then just the very bottom. But I'm going to leave those rails on it silver. I don't want to have to deal with painting that tiny little stuff. They probably would look better in black, but I decided to just give myself a break and just do it this way instead. While the sleigh is drying, I'm going to work on my presents. I have two of the tumbling tower blocks, and I've got three of these little wood cubes that come from Crafter's Square. I'm going to use some jute twine and some black and white twine, tie some bows on them, and make them look like little presents. To give this sleigh an enamel look, I'm just taking a black marker and I'm going to run it along the edges. And I'm also going to try and make it a little thicker in some spots so you can really see that black showing up. I'm also going to go around the bottom of the sleigh and make sure that I get those little pieces and points right here at the top. In preparation for the next thing I want to do, I'm just taking a couple of these little wooden blocks and I'm going to glue them into the bottom of the sleigh just to give me a little bit of height to work with. I've got some wired red ribbon here, and I just think this color is beautiful. I'm going to just roll it up, glue it, and this is going to become Santa's gift bag. I'm just going to hot glue it right to the inside of the sleigh and make sure that I get those two seams put together nicely. As you can see here, I ended up having to take those little wooden blocks out so I could tuck the bag right to the bottom of the sleigh, and then I'm just going to pop them back in. Using some hot glue, I'm just going to glue the packages inside the sleigh and then add a few sprigs of holly. This next project is my absolute favorite. It is just adorable. I'm using some regular size popsicle sticks, and I've got two sets of four here, and they're about 3.5 inches in length. Then I'm cutting some more pieces that are about 1.5 inches in length. And I'm using these miter shears. I love them. I just got them not too long ago. I will have a link down in my description box for them if you want to go check them out. They are super handy for making different angled cuts, but even just working with popsicle sticks. I can't use scissors. It's just too difficult for me. So I am just using these miter shears to make the job easier. Now that I've got these 1.5-inch pieces cut, I'm going to use those as the pieces to glue the 4 longer pieces together. And that's going to make the sides of this little box that I'm creating. So now I've created 2 of the long sides of my box, and now I have to create the short sides. So these are 1.5-inch pieces, maybe almost 2 inches, maybe 1 3/4 inches. Anyway, you can make this any size you want. It really doesn't matter. But this is the pattern that I'm using. So I'm going to now glue these together with these little side pieces. But what I'm doing now is I'm going to hang that side piece off the 4 because I want there to be a little bit of an overhang. And the reason I'm doing that is when I glue everything together, I want to have a nice seam in the corners. Now that the sides are all assembled, I need to give it a bottom. So I just cut some more popsicle sticks in the length that I needed, and I'm just gluing them to either edge. Now it's time to paint, or I should say stain. I'm using some burnt umber and a little bit of black. I'm going to mix that together, and then I will use a spray bottle to add some water and just make it a nice deep brown stain. I'm going to cover all of the box, the bottom, the sides, and the inside. While I wait for the box to dry, I'm going to take some of these little sticks that I got from my backyard, and I'm going to dry brush some of them with white. I want them to look a little bit like birch logs. They're not going to be 100%, but some of that little bit of bark is going to show through. I just wanted to have a couple different colors of wood. I'm going to take this white marker that I have. It's not a paint pen, it's just a marker, and it's going to be very faint, and that's what I want. I wanted this box to kind of look old. So what I'm doing is just writing in the words birch and pine, and I'm going to put a little dollar amount next to them. So the birch will be 10 cents and the pine will be 5 cents. I'm going to add in some of these greenery picks, and then I'll glue in the logs too. And at the end, I'm just going to add a few little red pip berries. The last project I have for you today is using these wood planks from the Dollar Tree and these beautiful napkins. These I did get at Dollarama. They're gorgeous. Look at the back side of them. That reindeer is beautiful and the snowflakes are so pretty. So what I'm going to do is cut out the reindeer and use my Mod Podge, glue that to the front. I'm going to take one of the pieces from the back and glue that on the back so I have a double-sided sign. I'm going to use Mod Podge to glue the napkin on, and because this is raw wood, you have to put a fairly decent amount because it's going to soak in pretty quickly. The other thing that I'm going to do is mist down the napkin with a little bit of water because that's going to give me some extra working time. Then I'll just lay the napkin right onto the wood plank and smooth it out as best I can. I don't mind having wrinkles and bubbles in my signs. I think that makes them look a little bit more aged and weathered and vintage. But if you want something really smooth, then you're going to have to be super, super careful with these napkins because they do tear fairly easily. Then I'm going to put a coat of Mod Podge on top, and then once it's dry, I'll remove the excess napkin. I'm using 3 of these tumbling tower blocks, and that's going to become the stand for my sign. I'm going to glue them together end to end with hot glue. The sign is fairly dry now, so what I'm going to do is take some sandpaper and just go along the edge to remove any of the excess napkin. This is a really easy way to get a nice clean edge. Now I'll repeat the same process with the napkin on the back of the sign. I'm going to put some glue down the center of the tumbling tower blocks and then glue the wood piece right on top. To finish the edging off and make it look a little bit more clean and high end, I'm using this buffalo check ribbon that I grabbed at Michael's. I think it's about a half an inch wide, and I'm going to glue it down the center of the frame. So I'm going to have a little bit of ribbon poking out on each side. If you've been following me along on YouTube and watching my videos, you'll know that I'm not a bow person. But this sign needed a little something to finish it off. So I'm just going to make 2 little loops with some hot glue, and I'm going to glue them together, and then I'm going to make a tiny little loop and glue that in the center, and it will become my bow. My first project for you today is inspired by those beautiful little cloth reindeer that you can see out in the stores and on Pinterest. This is a piece of buffalo check fabric that I grabbed at Walmart, and I've got it folded in half, and this is the wrong side. So I'm going to take my marker and I'm just going to freehand the body shape of a reindeer. I'm going to go up for his little tail a little bit, and then I'm going to also then just go around, not make anything fancy. It's basically a rounded rectangle with a head and a tail. When I was cutting it out, I left a good 1/4 of an inch of a seam allowance all along the edges. Although I'm not going to be sewing this, I'm going to just use hot glue, but I want to make sure that I have enough fabric to make a nice size reindeer. So if I go along on the marker lines, it's going to be quite small. So I wanted to make sure he was fairly big in size. If you have a sewing machine, you could easily just do a nice stitch all the way around, leaving a little portion open so you can stuff it. I decided just to use some hot glue. At the back by his little tushy, we're going to leave that space open because that's going to give us the ability to turn it right side out and then stuff it. When you're turning things right side out and you've used hot glue as your seam, you need to be really careful that you don't accidentally pull it apart. Of course, it can be re-glued again, but you just want to take your time, be gentle with it, and make sure that you don't open up too many of the seams. For the stuffing, I'm using a Walmart bed pillow that I picked up for $4. It's their cheapest ones, and they're fantastic to use for projects. What I'm going to do now is, again, very gently push the stuffing in small pieces, and I'm also going to use a dowel to help me get it up to where his head is and in any of the little corners. He's all stuffed, and I'm just going to use some hot glue to close the seam. To add the antlers, all I'm going to do is take my scissors and snip a tiny little hole on either side of his head. Now I've decided to use these little branches that I cut off from a maple tree in my backyard because I just thought those little buds looked like perfect little antlers coming out. And I'm going to take some hot glue, push it into the hole, and then I will just add the antler in and secure it a little bit more with some extra hot glue. I'm using some sticks for his legs, and I'm going to use the same concept. Cut a tiny little hole, push some hot glue into it, and then wiggle the branch up and into the hole, and it will stick right onto the hot glue. The last thing he needs is some ears. I'm taking a piece of this buffalo check ribbon that was a little bit of scrap, and I'm cutting out somewhat of an oval shape. And then at the bottom, I'm going to use some hot glue and pinch the 2 ends together. I think these turned out absolutely adorable. My second project is using this Dollar Tree Flowers and Garden galvanized bucket. I took it outside to my garage and spray painted it with matte white spray paint. Using this cutout stencil tree, I'm going to just trace it onto the bucket. Using some black chalk paint and a small artist brush, I'm going to just fill in the tree, making sure I get all of the edges nice and clean and crisp. I gave it a good 2 coats. I love making things look like enamel, so because this bucket has these nice little ridges on the top and the bottom, I'm going to take my black paint and just go all the way around the bottom lip and then along the top lip as well. I'm going to make a Christmas arrangement in this bucket, and I'm just using an old bread knife that I have to cut a piece of floral foam in half. Then I'm just going to wedge it into the bucket, and I don't even need to add any hot glue because it's in there pretty firm. I'm going to be adding some stems to this floral arrangement, and some of the picks out there can be a little pricey. So I wanted to give you an option to show you how to make your own. I'm using these Dollar Tree wired stems. When you take them out of the package, they're pretty sad looking. So what I do is I take my fingers and I just run it along the edge of each of the wire ties, and that just fluffs up that greenery a little bit better. Now, because these are wired, it's really super easy to get them to stay together. So I'm just twisting a few inches down at the bottom to make sure that they stay together. The next one I'm going to fold in half and then just add it to the original stem. Again, because it's wire, I can twist it and make sure that it's going to stay in place. I used about 5 stems for this pick, and now I'm going to hot glue some of the Dollar Tree pine cones onto the ends. When I do arrangements, I always like to start with the tallest piece first. So this piece of pine is going to be sort of the focal point or the point of the arrangement. I'm now going to take this other pick and push it down in front, and then I'm going to move it around so it gets intertwined with the other one. I love using boxwood in my Christmas arrangements because it is an evergreen and it stays around all year. This one has a little bit of a frosted look, so it will add some really pretty color and texture to this arrangement. Once I have the front main pieces in place, I'll take some smaller pieces and start filling in. I've got to add something to the back and make it look nice and full all the way around. And I've also got to add little bits down towards the bucket to cover up where the floral foam is and make sure there aren't any gaps. I'm going to glue on some pine cones here and there, just enough till I like the way it looks. And sometimes I don't even make it look the same on both sides, because when you're out in nature, things aren't symmetrical. They're a little wonky sometimes, so that's how I usually make my arrangements. Now it's time to add some color. This is the first year in a long time that I'm adding pops of red to my decor, but I think it's a more traditional farmhouse look. So I'm using these berries that I got at Dollarama. They were on a garland, and I'm going to cut off the holly leaves themselves and just use the berries and put them in wherever I think it looks good. This last project is probably my favorite of the 3, although I gotta say those reindeer were pretty darn cute. This is the bottom of a gift box, and I've just torn apart the edges and I'm going to cut off the excess. I'm going to make my own cone just by folding it and bending it until I get the desired shape. And then I'm just going to roll it and use hot glue to keep it in place. You could also use a styrofoam cone or a metal or plastic cone, whatever you happen to have on hand would work fine. I'm using hot glue on the seam to hold it all together. I'm cutting off the point because I'm going to want to glue a pine cone to the top, so I'll need it flat. And then I'm also going to trim the bottom flat and make sure that it can stand totally straight. I'm going to be using these white pine cones to create a Christmas tree. These are a garland door hanger that I picked up at Dollarama. I have a couple of these. And I also needed to go grab some other pine cones and spray paint them white so I would have enough to go all the way to the top. Before I start gluing on the pine cones, I'm going to add some burlap to it. It's going to do two things. The first thing is it's going to camouflage that white poster board, and the second thing is it's going to really help those pine cones to stick because hot glue sticks really well to burlap. Because it's a cone shape, I'm going to have to do some trimming, but that's okay. You won't be able to see any of those seams. So here's my cone. I have it sitting on top of a little bottle of Mod Podge, so those bottom pine cones won't be resting on the table. I'm going to put a generous amount of hot glue, and then I'm going to start at the very bottom and go all the way around the bottom of the cone. If any of the large pine cones have that stem down at the bottom, you're going to want to trim that away. The bottom should be as flat as possible to make sure that it sticks properly. The second row will be glued opposite to the first row, so you have sort of a brick lay pattern. You don't want to put them in a line because then you'll have more of the burlap showing. Don't worry about the gaps that you see in the burlap in between the large pine cones. We're going to fix that in a minute. Our Dollar Tree doesn't usually have these little mini pine cones, so when I found them, I grabbed, I think, 6 bags of each. I was a little pine cone piggy, so I apologize to anybody who came shopping behind me at that store and wanted to get some because I think I bought them all out. Anyhow, I've got some frosted ones and I've got some plain ones. I'm going to use these tiny ones as my filler pieces, and I'm going to start fitting them in between the cracks in between all of the large pine cones. So here's the top of my cone. I still have some filling to do, but I'm going to be adding this really large one at the very top. And that's why I had that cone cut straight across, because I want this pine cone to sit nice and straight right on top of it. I'm going to continue using these little frosted pine cones to fill in all of the burlap. I really love how this is starting to take shape. To add a little bit more extra color and texture, I'm taking some of the natural colored pine cones and filling them in different spots around the tree. Down at the bottom, there are still some gaps in between the large white pine cones. So I'm taking some of these medium-sized natural pine cones. I believe I had these last year and they were part of a filler package. So I'm just going to take some hot glue and glue those on. To keep this tree looking rustic, I'm using an old 2x4 and a couple of wood slices that have a screw put through them from the bottom to the top. And I'm cutting a piece of floral foam that I'm just going to stick right onto the screw, and then I will put the cone right on top of that. I'm going to make sure that it's wedged in there really nice and tight. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. If you're new to my channel, I'd love for you to stick around. Hit that subscribe button. Those 2 black arrows will show you exactly where to click. See you in the next one.